Hello and welcome to Myths, Monsters and Mysteries. If you're a lover of old myths, of monsters, of folktale or from fantasy, or enjoy the real-life mysteries which surround us, then you've come to the right place. This week, we're looking at the Banshee, the legendary figure of death that wails in the night, predicting a death in the family. If you consume any sort of genre media, then you'll have at least heard of the Banshee, and in contemporary media, you might have even fought them. However, in today's video, I'm just to show why the Banshee was never considered a villain or a monster. Instead, the Banshee was considered to be a mark of respect for the soon-to-be dead. To understand what a Banshee is, the best place to start is with their name. The term Banshee is an Old Irish word and is derived from the term Beansai, which in Old Irish means woman of the fairy mound or fairy woman. A fairy mound, or just mound, in Ireland are otherwise known as burial mounds that are intimately linked with death. When a great person died, the old Irish culture said that they should be buried beneath the mound, dead at the centre, like a pyramid. Sometimes these burial mounds would have large stones on top as well, to show their significance. The mounds still dot Ireland to this day, which is remarkable as some of these graves were made in the Stone Age, and so are at least 5,000 years old. These mounds aren't just a way to honour the dead. Like many places, old Irish culture linked where the dead go with the gods, fairies, and the supernatural, all mixing together. In Irish mythology, the gods and the fairies were the same thing, but we will touch on that later. There are also explicit links from the burial mounds and the supernatural, as there are multiple myths that heroes use the burial mound to get to the other world, which is the home of the Irish gods and fairies. That is why the mounds are also known as fairy mounds, as they are a gateway to the other side, or the other world, as is otherwise known. The Banshee, then, is perfectly named, as she is literally a death-related fairy. Despite what modern versions of the Banshee depict, the Banshee doesn't actually hurt anyone. Instead, the Banshee is a harbinger of death. Now, it can seem creepy, but they don't cause death, they simply announce it to the world. The Banshee does this by letting out a large wail, or keening, which is described as a loud scream that seems to go on forever. Once the person who the Banshee is wailing for actually dies, or the sun comes up, she will then leave. This wailing for the dead was a common practice at funerals in ancient Ireland, though the wailing would be called keening. Keening is a type of song that would be sung at a funeral, normally done by a woman, that involved a scream turned into song, normally about the deceased themselves. The fact that this proper send-off is from a fairy outside, and the person hasn't actually died yet, does make it creepy, but not bad. In fact, the folklore says that to receive a Banshee is to be honoured, and it is a rare occurrence for a Banshee to appear. What adds to this creepy vibe, though, is how the Banshee looks. One of the first descriptions we have is long streaming hair which she may be seen combing, with some legends specifying that she can only keen whilst combing her hair. She wears a grey cloak over a green dress, and her eyes are red from continual weeping. She may be dressed in white with red hair and a ghastly complexion. This is from Lady Anne Fanshawe, who in the 1600s wrote a book called Memoirs about the life of her husband and herself. An interesting fact, Lady Anne Fanshawe is credited to be the person who wrote down the recipe to ice cream, and so introduced much of the world to it. The recipe actually was in the same book as this description of the Banshee. The story goes that Lady Anne and her husband were staying in Ireland, and in the night Lady Anne was woken by the Banshee. The next day she was informed by her host that someone had died. She recorded the whole encounter and then promptly left the property never to return. A frankly smart move, if I ever heard one. The other famous description we have of the Banshee is from Lady Wilde, an English-Irish poet in the late 1800s. Lady Wilde wrote under the pen name Speranza, and another interesting fact, Lady Wilde was the mother of the famous Irish poet Oscar Wilde. Lady Wilde says, "The Banshee's stature was short, anywhere between 1 and 4 foot. Her exceptional shortness often goes alongside the description of her as an old woman, though it may also be intended to emphasise her stature as a fairy creature." Sometimes the Banshee assumes the form of some sweet singing virgin of the family who died young, or she may be seen at night as a shrouded woman crouching beneath the trees, lamenting with a veiled face. The Banshee then, in the old tales, was undeniably creepy, but was never meant to be dangerous. The wailing was a sign of respect for those about to die, which brings us to a new question. Who gets a Banshee? The folklore says that only the true Irish will get a Banshee when they're about to die, which brings up the next question. Who are the true Irish? This question touches on the mythological history of Ireland, the influence of Christianity, and the mixing of Old Irish and New Irish ideals, all of which is fascinating, odd, full of Christian fan fiction, and very much needs a full video to properly describe. The very short version, though, is that when the English and Christianity came back to Ireland in the Middle Ages, the Christians tried to tie Ireland and Irish history and their pagan myths into Christianity. This was a way to help Irish pagans make the switch back to good old Christianity. This mixing was formalised in the Libor Gabla Aran, aptly named the Book of Invasions, and is a book of poems and stories written down in the 11th century. In this Book of Invasions, they describe how 5 groups of people tried to settle Ireland back in the past, and all but the 5th wave died. For the purpose of this video, the first 3 waves don't really matter, but the 4th wave, we'll call the Tuatha De Danann, sorry for my pronunciation, who were the magical people who would later become fairies. They were considered perhaps gods before Christianity, but we're not entirely certain. Either way, we know that the Banshee, as a fairy, was part of this 4th wave. The 5th wave were called the Malaysians and were Spanish from the Iberian Peninsula. This 5th wave were made up of normal people, and they somehow convinced or fought the fairies away from the surface of islands. The 4th wave went to a place called the Otherworld, though some fairies, like the Banshee, can cross when needed. Banshee then will only come out and wail for an Irish family and trace their lineage back to this 5th wave of Irish people, these Malaysians. If you can't trace your lineage back to them, then the Banshee will not call for you. Basically, it's cutting out anyone of English or Scottish descent. And that's it. The Banshee isn't a complicated monster. It only has one real characteristic of what it does, the wailing, and its look can just be described as a grieving woman. And I think that's why I like it so much. The Banshee isn't a monster, it isn't a thing, it's a job, a duty. Instead, it is there to show that the fairies, or even nature itself, is grieving the loss of someone about to die. In a story, or in a narrative, this can be used to great effect, as the Banshee is there as a physical representation of grief, of loss. But that's just me. I hope you enjoyed this video, learned a little bit, and if I got anything wrong, like I'm sure I did, please let me know in those comments. And if you have any ideas of what you'd like in the next video, just let me know. And in the meantime, have a great day. Bye.